that flag became official and mandated by law to fly over our federal buildings. I think every state had its own law requiring to fly on state buildings. But this happens in 1991, which was the date of the first Persian Gulf War. In fact, we've been at war with Iran ever since. By the time of the Persian Gulf War in 1991, Americans had become habituated to a memory of Vietnam as an American tragedy. For a growing number, Vietnam was simply a wall of American names rather than a distant Asian country struggling to rebuild after decades of devastating war. The damage the United States had inflicted on Vietnam receded deeper into the background. About 2 weeks after the Gulf War began, 3 academic researchers conducted phone interviews with a random selection of citizens in Denver, Colorado. They asked people to respond to President Bush's statement that the current war would not be like the one in Vietnam because U.S. troops would not have to fight with, quote, one hand tied behind their back. 79% supported the statement. The Denver survey also asked people to estimate the number of Vietnamese who were killed in the Vietnam War. The median answer was 100,000. The Vietnamese government estimates that 3.4 million Vietnamese died in the war. That same year, 1991, U.S. history's bleakest public symbol of American victimhood was enshrined by law. Never has such a gloomy image been displayed so prominently, not on our coins, our statuary, or our national monuments. It is a black flag, POW-MIA flag. And in 1991, by an act of Congress, it was ordered to be flown over every federal building in the country. It is on permanent display in the Capitol's rotunda, a stark contrast to the historical paintings and statues meant to ennoble a glorious past. It is the only flag besides the Stars and Stripes ever to fly over the White House. And again, most states have laws. The flag is mostly black. In the center is a relatively small white circle dominated by the black profile of a man's head. The head is bowed forward, a dark, featureless cameo of anonymity and isolation. The guard tower looms in the background, and behind the man's neck runs a strand of barbed wire. It is as if we were peering into a distant prison camp through binoculars. Above the circled head are the letters POW-MIA. At the bottom, you are not forgotten. What's clear about all of this is it's even in the language of the bill, is that missing in action are conflated with prisoners of war, and we are invited to assume that every missing in action might in fact be still held as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. We're encouraged to believe that, and it was manipulated politically by every president in the years after Vietnam, despite the fact that none of the evidence that appeared proved to be true. I mean, there was a lot of fraudulent evidence. There was a huge market for evidence. I mean, money was flowing throughout Southeast Asia looking for anything. You know, visual sightings, photographs, dog tags. And of course, when you put out that kind of money, stuff comes forward. It all turned out to be fraudulent. But the media bought it. In 1991, Newsweek and other outlets ran front-page cover stories. There's a picture of 3 Americans purporting to be POWs still alive and held captive, and they ran that story. Only weeks later did they discover that it had been a photoshopped photograph from a 1923 magazine called Soviet Life. There was actually a picture of Stalin lower down the photograph, kind of etched out. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, and on the basis of this kind of stuff, plus a whole decade of these POW films like Rambo and Missing in Action, sort of cultivating for all Americans, especially younger people, this idea that there must be something real here. By 1991, 69% of Americans believed that American prisoners were still being held in Vietnam. Extraordinary. And again, we ought to always think about the political uses of history, whether it's real or phony, in this case phony. And just to give you a little bit of that political usage, it served as a case study of communist perfidy. It provided retroactive vindication of U.S. intervention. if the Vietnamese were cruel enough to hold American prisoners long after the war, wouldn't everyone agree that America was right and noble for trying to defeat them? The specter of POWs also provided the perfect justification for ongoing hostility toward Vietnam, the continuation of economic embargo, denial of access to aid and international loans, and opposition to diplomatic relations. The POW myth and the vision of sadistic communist torturers that they upheld also reinforced Reagan's larger foreign policy goals, vast increases in military spending, the first-term rejection of détente with the evil empire, military support to right-wing Central American governments and their death squads that fought left-wing insurgencies in support for the Contra War against the government of Nicaragua. So, I have a long description of Rambo himself as the epitome of the victim hero. I just point out, and something you all well know, for all the commercial success of the movies, actual Vietnam veterans found little in Rambo to admire. He vivified every negative stereotype imaginable. Vet as psycho, vet as killer, vet as outcast, vet as victim. Nothing in these films did justice to the complexity of the war or those who fought it. The fact that actor Sty Stallone had evaded the real Vietnam War in the 1960s only made his one-man efforts to redeem and refight the war in the 1980s all the more galling. Then, of course, there is this victim nation thing, but it's cobbled together as well with a desire to restore American pride. And that's kind of a funny thing, you know, almost pride in our victimhood. And then you get a whole cycle of movies that emphasize that. And so I have a long analysis of, in particular, the movie Top Gun, which was the #1 blockbuster in 1986, which starring Tom Cruise, which does have a little bit of a Vietnam backstory that you have to kind of watch it carefully to catch the Vietnam backstory. But I'll give you a little of it.